Hi guys. So, gonna have one of my friends on to have a chat about all things injury related. Just waiting for her to jump on. Uh, oh, there she goes. She's on already. Right. So, Hannah, if you request to join, it should pop up for me. There we go. And give Elliot a wave as well. Right, mate. How we doing, Hannah? You right?
Yes, are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Thanks for jumping on with me.
That's all right. Why is my head so big on this live?
Are you like sat right in front of your?
Let's just move back a little bit. Yeah.
So for those of my followers who don't know you, just give us a little background about yourself. Like, how did you end up in the fitness industry? Give us a little bit of a background about yourself.
Um. So I got into fitness actually. It was only about 5 years ago. Um. I was actually not. We're talking about sports rehab today, but I'm not actually very sporty. I never really played a sport. I did swim a little bit, and then I found exercise and training in a way that I preferred in my mid to late 20s, and now I work with sports rehab. About to graduate, and yeah.
Good stuff. So I was quite excited to get you on purely based on the fact that coming from a grappling background and a lot of my followers and mates from that same industry, they're chronically broken. So getting you on to chat to, I think you're probably going to have quite a few tuning in to pick your brain as this goes on.
Yeah, I've already had it today. I put in the box like ask me some questions about your rehab, and but the thing is, people then think, oh, I'm just going to tell you that I've got a knee pain, and it's like, okay, what do you want me to do about it? Like, that's always quite funny because what you find is it's the same with the fitness industry. People will give you no context to things like, tell me what diet to go on, and it's like, well, actually. I need a bit more context, and that's the kind of same thing with rehab and exercises. And you've got so many different sports as well. So, like a knee injury for a rugby player compared to a basketball player or a footballer, they're all going to need different things, and there's so many different demands of sport.
I was going to say, like, because I've had quite a few queries coming into this. People looking for like
I
specific
knew it.
tips, which is going to be, obviously it's a tricky one to specifically get information on without assessing people. So I told people that it's going to be much more kind of like salient views on basically like prevention in general and general health, but the things that they can apply so that they won't you won't have someone that rocks up and takes what you're saying in a general context to be a very specific injury that they have.
Yeah. That's the thing. And do you know what, like, just as you've got all the charlatans in the fitness industry saying to go on keto and intermittently fast, like we're being told that, do this, do that, you can bulletproof your shoulders, do this for low back pain, this is the best exercise. So it's just as confusing in this industry as it is the general health and exercise industry, which is really funny because I see it all from both sides now, and I'm like, oh gosh.
Well, I was going to say, like, when it comes to pain, it's quite a nuanced thing. It's quite hard to pinpoint the root cause of a pain, and it could be multifaceted. It could be
Yes.
something. Is that something that you found that you have trouble getting across to people? Like when it comes to entering into a rehab situation, the fact that the answer for them may not be as clear cut as they maybe hoped.
It's never as clear cut, and I mean, if you look at especially the last year, we've had high stress, high demands, psychologically, the toll of lockdowns. We're outside of our environment, so it's even things such as rugby clubs and sports facilities being shut, to people not getting on their usual commute to work. So activity levels have decreased. You're not even pottering around the office, and people are just sat in the same position, especially during lockdown number 3. I imagine the people's exercise and stuff has been a lot lower. And then as well, when you're talking about the multifaceted issues of pain, it's hard to say it, it's in pains in the brain, it doesn't indicate damage. Pain's such an individual experience, and sometimes it can come across as though you're undermining it by saying, well, actually, yes, there may not be any damage. And it's not that, because pain is what that person is experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing. It's when it comes to the extent of pain, that was always something that I struggled to get my head around when it comes to subjective measures of pain. So like,
Yeah.
I
Point
had
here and show me where it hurt. Like we have there's something called the visual analog scale, where it's like you look at a ruler and you pick on where it is that you feel it is, and then you divide the difference and work out in centimeters
yeah.
what the pain is. But yeah.
Well, that's the thing. Like when it comes to recently having my shoulder checked out remotely, it's like, oh, describe the pain when you do this movement on a scale of like 1 to 10. And I was like, that's going to be really subjective to the individual, because my 5 might be someone else's 4, someone else's 9. You know, it's a very hard thing to pinpoint.
And as well with these virtual assessments, that's an AC. That's they were checking your acromioclavicular joint, and it's like that one's quite easy. But some of the tests, can the person do it the other side of the screen, and how specific are they? It's just there's a lot of interesting things, and working virtually, you can be really efficient, but also there's going to be a degree of, is this going to be accurate? Am I getting the full picture? You know, are they doing this correctly? And it's quite interesting.
Yeah. When it comes to rehab in general, if you had to narrow down something as a common area that you notice people are kind of selling themselves short in, or perhaps not doing their due diligence, is there something that pings to mind, like rushing back too quick, for example? Or
Well, yeah, like rushing back too quick. When you've had one of the biggest predisposing factors to a re-injury is having a previous injury, whether that's, say that you've had an ACL injury, rush back too soon, you're going to rupture the ACL, or you could cause damage to an associated structure, and yeah, that's like a really important thing. Is it really is a case of assessing where you're at, you know, as well, psychological readiness to return to play. So you may have the adequate strength, function, movement capabilities, but are you ready? Is there going to be a fear avoidance? So that also needs to be considered.
yeah, when it comes to, if you were to give people advice, and I hate to use the term like say bulletproofing, but if you were to try and give people general advice on prehab or prevention of injury, and exercises they could do, be it mobility work, strengthening, is there kind of like a structure that you would say to people, look, if you want to prevent yourself from being injured as long as possible into your career, whatever it may be, these are the types of things that you want to be doing?
So there's so many things that can predispose us to an injury risk. So you've got your internal factors, like I said, you know, having a previous injury would be one of those. And then also, say if someone changes direction and tears their ACL, how did that occur? What was the movement pattern? You know, what was happening around, what happened on the day, and trying to find as much information as possible. In terms of saying, is there one specific thing? It's looking systematically. The more individualized you approach these things, the better your prehab will be.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
let's say if you've got some functional deficits, or you know, strength deficits, range of motion deficits, or all these things, your recovery is horrendous. It may be different for different people. So it's looking at the whole picture and just constantly assessing, you know, looking at the demands of your sport. Where are your weaknesses as a player or as a athlete?
yeah. But when it comes to the range of motion one, hits home pretty closely with me because I have all the pliability of a block of wood. So when it comes to an area that I would be lacking, I suspect that would be somewhere near the top.
Yeah, and that's one of the first things we do in rehab once kind of swelling and pain is down, is we want to get that range of motion back quite quickly. So range of motion exercises are really, and that's why I personally, I really like to be strong in a large range of motion. But if you think different players, rugby players need to be strong not rugby players, racket players need to be strong out here in that range of motion. And we're typically, when you look at your shoulders, we're quite strong up until here. When we go overhead, it's getting that capacity and that strength back. But I think we look too much at these generalized models and these physical therapy, you know, like Squat University will just give out generalized information and miss out quite a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was coming from the background that I initially came from. There was a lot of pretty useful and salient physiology in terms of like physical structure, but mixed with a lot of pseudoscience. And it took a while to separate the two things, because, like I say, like something may work, but it's not necessarily working for the reason that you're saying it's working. You know, it could be very much a case of, okay, you know, you just lucked out in telling the person to do this to rehab themselves. So I'm very much on the side now of basically following the science. But like you say, the model that they follow is a bit simplistic in the sense that it's very much just the physical, doesn't take into account.
It's just the biomechanics. People are so obsessed with biomechanics, and then you're getting these other people who are now saying biomechanics don't matter at all, and really we just need to find like a middle ground. You get people who've kind of cherry picked a little bit of research and it's suiting their narrative, but really we just need to take all the evidence and see what's the best conclusion, and then we need to apply that to a specific person, which is really important. You know, stress, looking at stress in athletes is really important.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on. If you actually look at COVID, what's their mental state been with the imposed lockdowns? Their jobs, their careers were sports people. They are working together in a team. That is their whole life, and that was taken away from them at some point. So that was actually a big risk factor, and a lot of the stress models used for the athletes then showed increased stress, which is again can predispose you to an injury.
Yeah, well, that was it's a good point that you make, and it was something that again hits home from a fighting background. And I know my friends that are watching this now, all from a grappling background, will have my back on this one, especially when it comes to competition and things like that. We tend to like red light in terms of like pushing ourselves, very little sleep. And when you're talking about nutrition, if it's a weight categorized fight, you're talking about reducing the amount of intake to bring your weight down as well. And it's a lot of stress to put on top of a very grueling training regime.
Yeah, and this is the thing. So you've named about 7 different factors there. How do you know? You could do all the mobility work, you could do all the strength work, but what is that going to reduce the risk of injury that those other things have caused? No.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. It's hard to look at. Like when it comes to say I was training for a fight or training for a rugby match or whatever it may be, and I have shit sleep, my nutrition is all over the place because I'm trying to bring my weight down. Well, is the injury a result of the compounding of all of those factors, or what is it? What's the straw that broke the camel's back? It's hard to, like you say, to isolate one single factor in that injury.
And you can't prevent where that other player is going to tackle you, or you know what kind of effects that the other player is going to have on you in grappling or something. You can't reduce that because you can't expect it to come from here and here on that day at that specific time point. So it's, I always say, rather than focusing on injury prevention, is looking at, you know, reducing the risk. But even then, it's not guaranteed because you've got all those extrinsic external factors. You know, you could do all the ankle rehab, all the knee rehab. If you trip over something, or there's something, you know, like someone always tells me they rolled their ankles, but is that your ankles, or is it the fact that the pavement's got like half? How would I reduce the risk? Again, I'd do individual assessments. So I'd look at my own range of motion, I'd look at my own muscle mass, not muscle mass, muscular strength, sport specific. So what are the demands of the sport? So what are the demands of? I don't know too much about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So what are the demands of?
So I'll give you like a quick break. You're looking at very, unfortunately, a very flexion-based, often forced spinal flexion, a lot of rotation on the joints, again, against the joints' will, because people are generally rotating your joints to try and break them. And like the most common injuries you see outside of knee injuries that every grappler has, it tends to manifest itself later in their careers. You talk about neck and back issues from being stacked and rolled up, and
Yeah.
you know.
That's it. That's interesting. And with spinal flexion, there used to be a lot of people who would say that, you know, spinal flexion's so bad, spinal flexion's this, spinal flexion's that. But look at Jefferson curls. So if I was doing BJJ, I would probably do some Jefferson curls, you know. I'd get really strong, but also you've got quite close packed positions there. So I'd focus on all those sport specific movements and getting strong where I need to be. But again, having a strong, people laugh, like if you were to walk into the gym and you saw someone training their neck, people would think that's so weird, but why would you not train your neck?
Yeah. Well, that was apparently one of the main things in boxing that that you see Tyson doing quite a lot. Like, because when it comes to like, the physiology of a knockout, the impact of the head swinging back and the brain hitting the skull is what kind of turns the lights out. And having that extra stability around the neck prevented the whiplash effect and prevented the brain from like twatting into the side of the skull, basically.
Well, yeah, we kind of, as personal trainers, we always talk about progressive overload, this to strengthen this, we need to do this, but why would we not do it for the neck? Why would we not do it for the spine? Why would we not apply those principles to these other structures that aren't a bicep or aren't a quad or aren't a hamstring or a calf? So I would really train for the demands of that sport, and I'd get strong range of motion for those exercises.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Like, funny enough, the guy that asked that, Elliot, I'd spoken to before about both of us having crappy range of motion in general. So it's something that we're both very aware of and looking to make improvements on as we go. Obviously, harder once you get older.
If you think about it, though, if you think about it logically, your sport doesn't require, like in life and health, yes, you need a large range of motion, but your performance probably hasn't necessarily massively suffered because of it, because you're in those close positions. How far away are your arms from your body? You're not working in extreme ranges, really.
Yeah, it's very much, it's a good point that you make there, to be fair, because when it comes to the extra range of motion in grappling, it's generally a way to prevent getting submitted just for that little bit longer, so someone can bend your arm that little bit further before it breaks, you know, that type of thing. So it's not necessarily the best thing, although there are certain positions that it's beneficial to have the extra range of motion in, but generally as a beneficial factor, it's going to be letting you hold on to it, which isn't a good thing, really. It's one of the things that we laugh about as grapplers, that we have that meathead mentality. So when it comes to someone like, say, doing a key lock, so rotating the arm that way against its will, once that's happening, it's like, okay, how long can I hold out before I submit to this? You know,
not last long.
Yeah. Well, especially when it comes to shoulder mobility, internal, external, that's one of my probably weaker areas, I suppose. So yeah, it's very much, I definitely keep my arms in nice and close because I don't want people getting hold of them when it comes to that kind of situation.
At all. And like, this is the thing, it's so, we go on to Instagram and you can see all these clickbaity things, bulletproof this, bulletproof that, but some, like, as well, when you focus too much on biomechanics, I said it earlier, what's dysfunctional for someone may be functional for another. There's talking about, someone was asking me about swimming earlier, you've got scapular dyskinesis, which people always relate to pain, and it's kind of jumped on, but is that just an adaptation to swimming? You can't be so, everyone's so black and white with it, and then we kind of jump on these ideas, but it really just comes down to individualization.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing is the whole kind of thought of, do people's biomechanics lead them to the sport that they excel at, because their body is a certain way, it moves a certain way, the range of motion is a certain, so they're going to
Yeah.
excel at a certain thing.
If you look at runners, with some really what would be considered dysfunctional gait patterns, they can be faster than other runners. They you've got record holders with what would be considered abnormal gait patterns, and they've got, you know, gold belts. You've got the guy with scoliosis, and he was the first guy, Lamar Grant, to deadlift 5 times his body weight.
Oof, yeah, that'll do it.
So it's, but again, you can't rule out. It's not to say that if someone is experiencing pain or injury that you can rule them out completely, because that's where you get these really polarized views. But how important is it for that specific person?
Yeah. Well, funny enough, one of the things that came up, and it kind of leads to, I suppose, a two-part question for you. There was a lot of people asking about running. So with gyms being closed, a lot of people are getting out and running at the minute. And they're asking for, so there's a lot of runners that haven't run in a long time. So they're getting out and they're getting a lot of pounding on the joints and things like that. When it comes to like straight line, relatively long distance running, so say like your 5, 10Ks, whatever it may be, are there any kind of things you'd recommend for them to strengthen or kind of prevent any kind of like wear and tear on the joints? And would that change, your advice change based on if they had a multi-directional sport that they had to play, say like rugby, for example? Would the exercises that you'd recommend for them in general alter?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So like sagittal plane and transverse
Yeah.
plane. Yeah. So change of direction exercises are really important, but also, for example, rugby players, they need to be able to be efficient in their force production during rotational movements, and not only that, they need to withstand force coming at them rotationally. So it's, if you look at all the different movements in, I've got some of them here, I dedicate, you've got line outs, scrums, rucks, tackling, mauls, repeated sprints. It's looking at those rather than just thinking your standard, let's do a little bit of this, let's do a little bit of that, you know, just do some rotator cuff exercises like this. You know, it's looking at it systematically. And, you know, again, I'd do the neck strengthening exercises with the rugby player. If you look at, there's so many different injuries in rugby as well. You've got a lot of shoulder injuries, but you've also got a lot of concussions. So
Yeah.
quite interesting.
Yeah, well, that's the yeah, rugby, and obviously across the pond, NFL, American football, things like that. In that kind of situation, especially in NFL, when you've got super athletes, essentially, so you've got giant guys that are incredible athletes charging at each other from all sides. You're right.
Yeah, I just had a little slip.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, like when you got the if you're running in a relatively straight line, it's hard to prepare for being blindsided by like a 300-pound athlete running full speed, hitting you from the rear.
Exactly, and that's, you know, anti-rotation needs to come in that. They call it like transverse stability, but you also need to be quite strong in rotational movements as well to be able to produce force. It's funny, I was actually looking at in the NFL. In 2011, they had a lockout. I think it was something to do with pay. And similarly to kind of training conditions during this lockdown. But pretty much a third of their athletes were out with Achilles ruptures.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that actually massively increased what they usually expect in this kind of point of the season. So again, like, it's really important when we're thinking post-COVID to go back into sport, whatever sport it is, or even to go back into the gym and really take a graded approach, which is where your individual assessments will come into.
Yeah,
so I've got a client in Kuwait, and she's just been able to go to the gym this week. So the first thing I did, rather than just think, well, it was only 2 months ago we were in a gym, got straight back on assessments. So strength, range of motion, did a little bit of aerobic capacity with her, and then I'll base my program off there. But I suppose if you're going back into the gym and sport at the same time, you've got to really manage that load.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, that actually leads quite nicely into the next question. I was going to say, with gyms opening soon, fingers crossed, is there any advice you give to people that are chomping at the bit to get back to it?
Just take it easy. And as well, if you're going back into sport, you're going back into a contact sport. You're going back into, but you've been training at home alone, so you could have the best at home training guide, but you're going back into a contact environment. So that doesn't mean you're sufficiently prepared to go back to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So yeah, I'd look at really doing assessments, seeing how your recovery goes, and grading your exposure back into those environments and not overdoing it. Doing it, but not overdoing it. You know, like, well, back in December, I was squatting 80 kilos, so let's go do that now. Like, no, you know, it doesn't matter if you go back and, like, this time last year, I was squatting 80 kilos. Now I've got a home gym, I'm squatting 50.
Yeah, so it's not like you go back in and be like, right, okay, 80 kilos again.
Yeah, but that's what a lot of people do, and think they won't piece together that they, like, yes, they will get the strength back quite quickly, but not to run into that volume that they were doing before, all that load. And especially if you're throwing in contact sports, and as well with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I assume that when we were open last summer, was that non-contact still? So they were open, but you weren't allowed to grapple?
In theory, it was non-contact, but I think there was quite a lot of contact. And that, funnily enough, was where I picked up my shoulder injury that is currently plaguing me during a warm-up of all things. So,
yeah. If you've had, as well, when you look at your shoulder as well, can you describe that as the single event, or was it the events leading up? That caused it?
That's the thing. Yeah, it's literally a case of not doing very much in the way of like shoulder strength or stability, especially when it came to overhead. And again, I'm very much guilty of exactly what you say, like rushing back into things, because literally after speaking to my physio, his outlook was, okay, we want to start getting you strong and stable in the overhead position, so take it slow, start really building up strength there. And straight away I just went back and got my kettlebell that I was using prior to my shoulder injury and was doing snatches and whatnot. So it's very much the meathead approach.
With when we're looking at exercise prescription though as well, especially for shoulder injuries, you look a lot at the rotator cuff, and a lot of the prescribed rotator cuff exercises are therabands here, but you know, there's actually evidence to say supporting your elbow is a more efficient way, and the rotator cuff is kind of working through all shoulder movements, so it's getting, you know, lateral raises. You could argue that they're a really good exercise, so I'd be getting strong at those exercises. I possibly wouldn't do, after a big lockdown and hurting my shoulder and my foot, I probably wouldn't go to snatches so quickly, but looking at strengthening your rotator cuff, that's going to be really important.
Yeah, well, that was literally his recommendations for it were things like half Turkish get-ups, just basically, so I'm getting that load on there, and light. You know, he said basically don't go crazy with the weight, keep the weight relatively light, but at least you're strengthening the shoulder and stabilizing at the same time overhead, which is exactly what you want. And as soon as I got into the garage and looked at the kettlebells, I was like, right, that's going overhead.
And this is why it's so important, and this is why you can't really give out generalized rehab advice, because a half Turkish get up would be really good advice for you, but if you've got someone, you know, a gym goer who's not used to such functional movements, are they even going to be able to know what that feels like? Can they express that? Are they going to stabilize that shoulder? And it's just really, everyone's so different, and that's the beauty of it. And it's also the frustration, because there's never a straight answer for anything.
Yeah. Well, that's I suppose that's going to be one of the bigger challenges of your job. trying to get people to realize that there's not necessarily a simple answer for their pain.
Yeah.
As frustrating as it may be for someone who comes to you for answers, you know, they're coming to you and they want to hear, okay, this is the problem, this is how you fix it.
And
so when
even if you look at diagnosis, if you look at being diagnosed, sometimes that just reinforces that there's a problem, and people always want to know what the problem is. But is it a problem? I always go into rabbit holes, but is it a problem?
Yeah, well, that's your post earlier about wing scapula. You know, it's very much a case of like, it's not necessarily an issue for you because it's never caused you any pain. You know, it's
never caused me. Do you know what the worst one is? Posture.
yeah, I was waiting for that to come up. To be fair.
And you know, if someone's got neck pain, someone being in a forward posture is actually taking them out of their pain. But we're so, why are you looking like this? What spinal flexion's that? But people just jump onto generic ideas, and they're not aware that they're actually spreading quite a harmful notion that this is bad. You know, do you know what's actually really funny? I used to think I was really smart, you know, doing like, you know, the red X and the green tick for movement.
Yeah.
How's that actually helpful for anyone?
Yeah.
You know, how is it really? Because you kind of put in an insecurity and a fear around movement about that is bad. But there's so many, again, if you had a rounded back on a deadlift, look at powerlifters. Look at, you know, people arching their neck, getting better lifts. It's all context and all person specific.
Yeah, well, that's some of the stuff that Brett Contreras puts out. Very science driven, and I believe it was him that put out the thing saying that the best posture is the one that you can stand in that causes you no pain. You know, and there's going to be little nuances and differences on that from person to person. But if
we like to be so nitpicky, we like to be so dysfunctional, but in an attempt to make ourselves smarter, we're actually being very discouraging. Like, I prefer to be more optimistic about movement and improve where you can improve, but don't be so nitpicky. And what looks good on your movement is going to look on different on someone else's movement.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, what's a good one? Here's a good myth buster: neutral spine. You define it, get into that position. What is it? And you know, these things that are ingrained in us, but actually from a movement and a biomechanics perspective, what are they? Can we really achieve that?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like that was I think it was one of Brett's posts, but it was kind of re-emphasized by Scott University, funnily enough, where they're talking about about round back deadlifting, for example, and they were basically analysing powerlifters that were doing their pulls, and they were looking at some that had a rounded back when they did the deadlift, but they were talking about how the spine doesn't move once the lift commences. Like, so it might be rounded, but it's perfectly locked into that position, so it's going to avoid kind of any kind of flexion based injury, because it's not like they don't turn their deadlift into a Jefferson curl, for example, you know.
And again, like when we look at powerlifters, they're lifting at very high percentages of their 1 rep max. Can you blame an injury that would occur? Can you say that their lack of neutral spine was responsible? You can't.
Yeah.
It's the predisposing factors, it's all the other things around it that have contributed, and we can't single out and say that is the exact cause. But for some reason it's what we kind of like to do. Yeah,
well, that's the thing. It's like, for example, like if someone does get an injury while they're deadlifting, like, I use deadlifting because it's a fairly common one. Like, whenever there's the back injury, deadlift, as far as I've come across, tends to be one of the main culprits. But for example, someone injures themselves deadlifting, it might not be that that their deadlifting form is bad, for example. Could be a case, like you say, of all these mitigating factors. So maybe they show up to the gym, they're tired that day, and it takes a split second lapse of structural integrity while they do their lift from that tiredness, and boom, injury.
If you actually look at all these predisposing factors as well, you know, you've got different loads, volumes, rest periods, fatigue. You've got so many different things, but we just love to jump on rounded back.
Yeah,
around
yeah,
your back. Well, actually, you slept for 2 hours. You know, you've not eaten anything. You're feeling like crap. You've not warmed up, and you've gone straight into a working set at 90%. Of course, you're going to get. But there's so many different things. But I feel like we need to really look at the big picture, and that's what's really, really, really important. It's kind of boring. It's not like people want you to come on here and give you the best exercise, the best this, the best that, but really it's looking at everything for yourself and not other people. Like you said, you've got Lamar Grant, 5 times bodyweight deadlift, scoliosis.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's it's funny you mentioned that. The best. That's one of the things that really does wind me up. Like when you see like, oh, the best exercise for this and the best, and it's like you can't say that. You know, that's the type of thing. It's like saying the best diet, the best this, the best that. You know,
It's the keto equivalent. It is the key, bulletproof, or get this ball, because you know, like all these balls and the foam rollers. Again, they're not really addressing any issues. So, like, if you've got tight quads, why are you foam rolling them? Lengthen.
yeah, yeah.
If that's if they are tight or not, you know, it's tightness, weakness. Find out and fix, you know, strengthen. Don't foam roll. But people are just obsessed. But then you've got this. I could go down a lot of rabbit holes, so I'll leave that one there.
No,
But
go for it. You're like, I think for those of my followers that haven't come across your page before, you're known for like some pretty good rants. You know, you've got to pretty good. So if anyone's watching this and they want to see like rage directed at improvement, then you want to follow Hannah.
I have got better. I have got better. As I see a lot of misinformation, and the thing is, it is quite harmful. And again, like, you give the wrong advice to someone who's experiencing chronic back pain, you're really gonna cause harm. It's going to be debilitating. People are put off all exercises because their back pain is so bad. People avoid movement. There's a lot of fear about it, and that's all in the language we use, and making these feelings of fragility that we just shouldn't be doing, really.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that. So there's an older MMA fighter that springs to mind now. He's long retired, but he has had so many. So he came from a wrestling background, so it was very, very intense. The wrestling practices are known for being probably some of the most brutal training that you can do. It's very much like, not necessarily the most scientific. It's very much you go in and you hustle, especially from an American background.
Yeah.
They pride themselves in outworking everyone. So, but obviously have a quite high rate of injury. And this guy now, so he's probably in his 50s, I'd imagine. But he has every single one of his vertebrae fused together. So because he had so many like bulges and stuff. So when he turns, he's like RoboCop. Like he can't turn his head because his vertebrae are fused. So he literally has to turn his whole body to look at people. There's another grappler, again, older guy who has 7, 8 herniated discs, I think. You know, it's very much a case of, if these guys were given the right advice during the early parts of their career, they probably could be in a better state now, you know, because as a grappler, MMA background and things like that, one of the things that I am wary of is that I want to be able to do my sport well into my old age. You know, I don't want to get to the point where I can't do it anymore. So I'm a lot more mindful of trying to look after my body at the minute.
And again, I'd look at all those different training variables. If you look at, speaking about herniations, degenerations, and bulges, chances are you've already got one.
Yeah, yeah.
Chances are, if you look at the data, I think it's 60% of people under 30 and 80% of those under 50 have got some form of degeneration or bulge or herniation, but most of us are asymptomatic. So you could have 10 people in a room with a disc bulge, and I'm making these figures up. 3 of them will have pain, the other 7 won't.
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. It's
really complex. But then if you're talking, this guy is repeatedly injuring himself like that, then that you need to look at your training variables. And you shouldn't be coming out of training with one bulged disc, then another, then another, then another, then another.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's optimal, but yeah, you know, were they hammering it? You know, how long are these training days? How many hours a day? What was the rest periods? Or were they just going at it all
Yeah, so
day?
this is the thing, like with a lot of them, you're talking, it's now getting a little bit more scientific in the approach, thankfully. But like when I was younger and I was training it, it was very much literally like, so I had a part-time job, so I wouldn't start until midday. So I'd wake up, crack of dawn, go and train, and it would be a couple of hours and it would be hard training. Then I'd go to work, then I'd go back to the gym after work,
Yeah.
and then I'd go home and I'd sleep for a few hours and I'd do the same thing. I would do that literally 6 days a week, you know, and it was
A
yeah,
lot.
it's I like looking at it now. I'm fairly certain that a lot of that has played into my various injuries and brokenness that I experience now. Um, but again, it's just education, because at the time when I was training that, I wasn't into coaching or PTing or anything like that. Wasn't into physiology. So for me, it was a case of, okay, just train as hard as you can, just outwork everyone, you know.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about rest. I didn't think about recovery. It was just, okay, just push through all the time.
When you've got that competitive environment as well, are you going to overstep your capabilities in order to show off or keep up with your mates? Is that a risk factor itself? Yeah. It's very, very interesting, but there's a lot of things. We used to call it like wear and tear, and we're looking now more at wear and repair. Again, that's quite, you know, like you hear bone on bone a lot. They're all negative words, and coming away from that and being more optimistic in the language we use. And you know, you've said like 6 times you're broken.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
not broken. You've just
Oh, definitely broken. It's
yeah, you've just got a few things going on which are all fixable, you know.
Yeah, well, there's a thing. Like I noticed, like a lot of the people jumping in are various grapplers that I'm friends with. So I know they'll take a lot of this on board. Hopefully, some of them younger than myself, and that's part of the thing that I want to pass on to those, especially the ones that I'm teaching myself, to approach it in a smarter way than I did, so that they don't fall down the same rabbit hole. And it's hard to get into that sense. This is one of the things that me and one of my clients talk about a lot, because he's a similar age to me, has similar sort of issues in terms of like pain and stuff like that. And he said it could go back in time now and tell myself at 23, okay, look, you know, you've got to look after your body a bit more. You can't keep pushing it like this. But at that age, I wouldn't have listened to myself. I would have been like, nah, I'm fine. I'm gonna, you know. Is that something that you find when it comes to trying to prevent people from getting injured, or to recover in a safe way, that they might not take the advice that you give them on board?
You kind of, you get that a lot more in elite sports. There's a
Yeah,
lot of pressure from peers, coaches, financial pressure. You know, the pressure we impose on ourselves is to do too much, and we're scared to wind back in. And again, it just comes down to what demands are on that person. In working as a PT, it's easier, but no, it's not actually. How many people do you get to come to you and they think the best way to lose weight is to do 6 back-to-back HIIT classes on 600 calories and some lemon water?
yeah,
So
yeah.
how do you, but that's their ingrained belief. That is what they've been taught. That's not their fault. So it's slow education and changing perceptions. But we can't just, I used to think it was all about education, but I'm not here to dictate to you. We need to work together to find solutions. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. It's like if I told you now, well, okay, you're doing your Turkish get-ups, do 100 press-ups because it has this effect. What does it really mean anything to you? But if we come up with a solution together, that's how
Yeah,
you can over-prescribe or under-prescribe, and that would, some people like a more aggressive rehab. Some people need it grading back, and it depends on the injury as well.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that. That's one part of PN coaching that really stuck with me in terms of them talking about people tend to resist when you suggest something to them. So you say, okay, try this. Their initial reaction, not all the time, but it's going to be to resist that suggestion, because it's an external factor that you're putting on them. Whereas if it's something that you decide with the client, they're much more on board with it, and they feel like they're involved in the process themselves, and they're more likely to adhere to it.
And that's the thing, you know, we need to, whether it's a PT client or an athlete, or it's working together. And never, I don't like I'm not ever a drill instructor type person, and a rehab program between players, even if they were all in the same competitive environment, will be different for each of them. And it's really interesting, and you want to create that autonomy, so that person's in charge, they've got some degree of control over the process, and that's really, really important. And yeah, it's just, that's what I love about individualization, really.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that absolutely boils my piss when it comes to its stereotypical diet plan that someone will give to someone. In the case that it's, okay, don't eat this anymore. It's like the person's not going to take that on board. You know, it's
don't live with a rounded back.
Yeah. It's very much like you can tell someone, like when it comes to lifting, okay, do this, but it's not necessarily something that they're going to take on board if they've been doing something else completely pain-free for life, you know.
It's understanding that dogma. There's a lot of dogma, and that's an ingrained belief. Like, how do you tell someone who's experienced 20 years of diet culture that these aren't necessarily solutions? How do you tell someone that hurt their back in a deadlift that deadlifts aren't inherently dangerous, and there was other factors? And yet, you know, at certain time points, deadlifts may not be the most appropriate exercise during the rehab process, but are they off the table forever? No.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that was sorry, go on.
No, it's interesting. And then what is really interesting is overuse injuries, because it's regressing and progressing, and we've always got that ability to regress and progress where needed. And you know, if you told someone who loves running, well, stop running completely, you're never going to be able to run again in life. Wear and tear, bone on bone, degeneration. How's that going to affect that person who loves running?
Yeah, well, that's if you look at Ronnie Coleman, the bodybuilder, who's got some of the more severe spinal and hip injuries. You know, he's had God knows how many operations now, but he still wakes up every morning, goes to the gym, hits the leg press, you know, because it's ingrained into him as part of his life, and he'd probably do more damage to take that away from him than to
his quality of life. Like, again, like with his experiences and load and all those things, and recovery are really important, but if we're talking Ronnie Coleman, his quality of life, his perceived quality of life would be really low if he didn't have training. He would, it'd be really, really, really bad for him.
It was like that with my dad. So this is one of the things I remember from being a kid. My dad, he was always into bodybuilding culture. He competed a few times, and he was in the gym on Christmas Eve. I must have been maybe 5, 6 or something, and he was doing hack squats. And as he went down, it was a typical meathead thing of like his training partners, come on, one more rep.
Yeah.
He went down for that final rep. He said it sounded like a gunshot had gone off, and his quad had detached like completely. So he's got like a giant scar down his leg where they had to reattach it, which, speaking to my doctor client, he says like a quad detachment is pretty rare. Like, you don't see that often.
Yeah, it's not that not that common. But if you're thinking hack squat, you've got extreme rate, you can get extreme knee flexion there. He's going close to failure. That one more rep. You know,
Yeah.
there's a few different things. If you look at I like to look, you know, when we do 1 rep max testing, yeah, in athletic populations, people use it, but I prefer doing stuff like 8 rep max testing or 3 rep max testing because you've got less injury risk.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's the for like the average person that works a desk job and stuff like that. Do you necessarily need to be finding out their 1 rep max on a squat and a deadlift? No, not
No,
really. You know.
this is the thing. I get so annoyed when people just train how they like training. So you get powerlifter PTs train their clients like powerlifters, bodybuilder PTs train their clients like bodybuilders. Like, what is that person's goal? Like, why are you not listening to them? You know, physio PTs, giving them all the scapular stability exercises. Like, it's not even just deadlifts. Like, the problem's so widespread, or yeah, it's just bizarre.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just bizarre.
That's an interesting point you make about people training their clients like they like to train, not necessarily how the client needs to train or would benefit from training, but basically, I like powerlifting, so you're going to powerlift. I like CrossFit, so you're going to do CrossFit. You know, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's just so weird, and it's like, just why? Like, listen to the person, find out what they want to achieve, and work on that. Don't train them. Don't make them mini yous. They like, I worked in a gym with PT who'd get bloated from eating pasta. So she said, we don't know whether it was the pasta, we don't know if she was bloated. Anyway, she'd then tell all her clients that pasta was bad because she was bloated eating.
Yeah, yeah. That's and to be fair, like any diet that fits what I would describe as a ridiculous crash diet, uh, you know, like a paradigm, you're generally going to see that. Like, you open up on page 1, no rice, no pasta, no potato. You know, it's basically just cutting out all carbs and no processed food. It's like, yeah, because that's going to be a joyful life for me. Like, not eating that. Like, I mean, I had Five Guys yesterday. It was glorious. You know what I mean? But
exactly, and the thing is, it's like, why you know, keto is quite beneficial for children with epilepsy. Okay, what is it going to do for Sandra, who's 40, who is half Italian and, you know, wants carbs? Why are you telling us to go keto? I just don't get people. Again, it's you taking away that sense of autonomy that people have over their own decisions and finding what works and what is optimal for that individual person. And it's so neglected in the fitness industry. It really is.
yeah, 100%. Actually, one thing I was going to ask you, when it comes very specifically to injury prevention and things like that, what was it that kind of led you down that path? Was it a physical injury that you experienced yourself?
No,
That
it wasn't actually. I had a few clients with certain issues, so it might be back pain, and I thought I want to delve into this a little bit more. I liked the idea of being able to help people get out of pain, feel empowered through movement. So that was more my way of getting into it, I'd say.
Yeah.
There was a lot of people who I've worked with, they play a sport, they've had a really dodgy injury. Shouldn't have said dodgy. They've had an injury, and that's what's got them into it. But for me, I liked the idea of learning more about anatomy, biomechanics, pain, how to help people, because you can really impact people's lives quite positively by helping them retain function. I do like athletic injuries, I really do, but I also like exercise prescription for a whole wide of variety of things, health issues, you know, reducing someone's high blood pressure, you know, getting people into exercise. I just love the whole concept of everything, really.
Yeah, well, that segues nicely into, if people want to find you and learn a bit more about what you're doing, where can they go?
click the link in my bio.
Yeah. So for anyone, I don't know if you can see on here, it's at Hannah Murphy Fitness. It's your handle.
Yeah.
Yeah. At Hannah Murphy Fitness. Link in the bio, and then you can submit a form if you want to get on board.
Also, our therapy clinic is open, and if you did want an individual assessment, they are currently free, but it will be online. So anyone watching this technically can have a free assessment with me and a couple of other people.
Awesome. That's good stuff. Good to know. Right. Thanks very much, Hannah. That was awesome. I think there's a lot of useful information that people could take there in terms of the broad scope of preventing injury.
What's your take home?
I wish I had a time machine to tell myself this like a couple of years ago. Nah, it's very much a case of making sure that the areas that I figure I'm weaker in become stronger. So basically, like you say, assessing, identifying where I need to do work and doing the work. There's no real shortcut to it. You know, it's not like you can stop yourself. You can get yourself where you want to be without putting in the work. It's going to be very much a case of, okay, this area needs improvement. I need to work at it. I need to do it.
And so the take home is just as your nutrition advice, your fitness advice, it's individualization, individualized approach, knowing that there are two different risk factors, internal, external, and how much control we have. We need to control what we can control, but also there are going to be things outside of our factors, our control.
Yeah. Well, that's
getting weird from it.
Yeah. Excuse me. Oof, hopefully that is not a COVID cough, but we'll find out in a day or two.
I've been talking about kennel cough today. Kennel cough.
Oh yeah, one of my friends lost a puppy to that, unfortunately, which was horrific. It really upset me hearing about it. But it has now the two of the cutest dogs in the world that have their own Instagram, so it's definitely worth checking them out. Yeah. Yeah, so my boys are literally like the greatest thing. They're awesome. So I'm all fully on board.
That's the thing is optimize your movement. Look at everything, not just okay, I've got knee valgus and I've got a medial collateral ligament tear. Don't just look at those things. Look at the whole broad spectrum.
Yeah. That's a very salient point to end on. Thanks very much for your time, Hannah. Really appreciate it. Look forward to hopefully having you on again at some point. Probably when we've gone back to grappling and I have a host of injured people that will probably need your wise words.
We'll post this as a video as well. So if you want to catch up on the
so in theory, I may not be the most tech savvy, but I'm pretty sure when I end this, I can pin it onto my bio and tag you in it so that people can jump from your page to watch it as well. In theory, fingers crossed. And thanks to everyone that tuned in and watched that. It's very appreciated. Always good to have people willing to learn and hopefully live long and injury-free lives.
Hopefully, or at least at a reduced risk.
Yeah, exactly. Fingers crossed, eh? Right. Thanks very much for that.
See you later.
Catch you later. See you later, guys.